That's the thing nobody talks about when they retell this story. They talk about what I did. They talk about the vampire princess. They talk about the condition. But nobody ever starts at the beginning, which is that I, Private First Class Emeka Osaibansu, 26 years old, originally from Accra, Earth, West Africa, was supposed to be on kitchen rotation that night. I want you to understand what kitchen rotation means on Draveth 9. It means you spend 8 hours ladling protein paste into bowls for 300 soldiers who are too tired to care what they're eating. It means your boots don't leave the compound. It means you are, by every definition of the word, safe. But Corporal Dietrich had gotten his hand crushed in a loading bay incident 3 days earlier, and somebody had to cover perimeter watch on the northern corridor, and the duty roster worked its way down until it landed on me. I didn't complain. I wasn't the complaining type. My grandmother raised me to believe that showing up when you didn't want to was a form of prayer, so I strapped on my gear, picked up my pulse rifle, and walked out to the northern corridor at 2100 hours. The northern corridor of Draveth 9 is a half-kilometer stretch of composite walkway suspended between the main station hub and the outer cargo processing ring. On one side, you've got the open black of space, reinforced transparent steel panels giving you a view of the gas giant Draveth itself, all that swirling amber and rust red, close enough that it feels like it should be warm when you look at it. On the other side, you've got the station wall, gray and pitted with micro-impact scarring, covered in the kind of maintenance conduits and access panels that nobody looks at unless something breaks. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that has texture to it, the distant hum of environmental systems, the occasional pressure click of the station's hull adjusting to temperature differentials, the faint vibration under your boots that tells you the cargo processors are running even when you can't hear them directly. I walked my sector. I checked my quadrants. I noted a minor conduit leak at Junction 7C in my log, standard procedure, low priority. I ate half a nutrition bar. I stood at the northern observation point and watched Draveth's cloud bands rotate slowly in the dark. And then I heard the sound. Not a loud sound. That's what I keep telling people. It wasn't an explosion or a weapons discharge or anything dramatic. It was a small, sharp sound, like someone snapping a piece of dry wood. I turned. The access panel on conduit housing 7F, the one I hadn't checked because it wasn't on my assigned quadrant, was open. Not forced open. Opened. From the inside. That's when I saw her. She came through the access panel feet first, moving with the kind of controlled precision that doesn't belong to someone who's hurt. But she was hurt. I could see it immediately. The way she was holding her left arm against her chest. The way she moved her head, careful, calculated, like turning too fast would cost her something. The darkness of her clothing, which I registered first as black before I registered as wet. She was tall. Taller than me by a couple of inches, and I'm not short. She had the kind of features that register as inhuman before your brain catches up with why the angles are too deliberate, the symmetry too precise, the skin too. She'd describe it herself later as colorless, which isn't accurate. It's more like the concept of color is being expressed at a different frequency. She had long dark hair, loose, and she was wearing a flight suit that had been expensive before something had gone very wrong with it. Across the left shoulder and down the side, it was soaked through. She hadn't seen me yet. She was scanning the corridor in the opposite direction. I should have challenged her immediately. Procedure is clear. Unauthorized access through a maintenance conduit on a military installation is a Level 3 security breach. And the correct response is to immediately announce yourself, order the intruder to halt, identify yourself by rank and serial number, and request identification. I did not do any of that immediately. What I did was stand there for approximately 4 seconds while my brain worked through the following sequence. She's bleeding, she's hiding, she doesn't know I'm here, she's moving like someone who's being followed. That last one was what moved me. I know how people move when they're being chased. I grew up in a neighborhood in Accra where knowing that look was a survival skill. It's a specific kind of alertness, hyper-aware, turning corners before you reach them in your head, keeping your body small even when you're trying to look confident. She had that look. "Hey," I said. She spun. I want to be clear about how fast that was. It was not a human-fast spin. In the time it took me to register that she'd moved, she'd already placed herself in a defensive position, back to the wall, left arm still against her chest, right hand producing what I would later identify as a resonance blade from somewhere I cannot account for on her person. Her eyes were gold, not brown gold or hazel gold, gold. We looked at each other for what felt like a long time, and was probably 3 seconds. "You are alone," she said. Her voice was, I don't know how to describe this. It wasn't accented, not in any human language way. It was pitched at a frequency that seemed to vibrate in my sternum slightly, like hearing a cello from too close a distance. "Yeah," I said, "just me." "You have not called your station." "Not yet." Another beat. She was reading me. I could see it, the way her eyes moved, tracking, assessing. Not the way a frightened person looks at you. The way an intelligence looks at you when it's deciding something. "You are going to," she said. It wasn't a question. "I should," I said, "but you're bleeding pretty badly, so maybe first tell me what's shooting at you." Something shifted in her face. Not quite surprise, more like recalibration. "You noticed the wound before the security breach," she said. I noticed both. Wound seemed more urgent. She looked at me for another few seconds. Then the resonance blade disappeared. I still couldn't tell you where it went, and she said, in a tone that was entirely neutral, "Karath hunters. 3 of them. They entered Draveth 9 through docking port 14 approximately 11 minutes ago. They carry silver composite rounds. I have one lodged in my shoulder. They are approximately 6 minutes behind me." "Karath hunters," I said. I knew the name. Everybody on the border stations knew the name. Anti-vampiric faction, not affiliated with any galactic council, operating out of the Rim systems. Committed, extremely organized, and not known for leaving jobs unfinished. "The round is disrupting my cellular regeneration," she said. "I need it extracted within." She glanced at something on the inside of her wrist, a bioluminescent marking that shifted as I watched. 16 minutes. After that point, the compound in the casing will reach my cardiac nodes. She said this the way you'd say, "I need this report by Friday." Completely level, informational. "Okay," I said, "come with me." I want to be clear that what happened next was not heroic in any cinematic sense. I did not sprint through the corridor. I did not produce a perfectly calibrated toolkit from my utility belt. I took her to Junction 7C, the leaky conduit I'd logged 40 minutes earlier. Because it was the only recess in the northern corridor that offered concealment, and I crouched down and opened my field kit, which every perimeter guard carries, and I looked at her shoulder. The entry wound was about 2 centimeters in diameter. The surrounding tissue, and here is where things stopped being routine, was black. Not bruised black, chemically black. The silver compound had been doing its work for however long it had been in there, and the discoloration was spreading in a dendritic pattern, moving outward from the wound in thin lines like cracks in dried mud. "Does that hurt?" I said. "Yes," she said. "Though I should note that your definition of pain and mine do not share an identical framework." "Okay," I said. "I'm going to need to know exactly how deep it is." 47 millimeters, angled 7 degrees posterior. "You know that precisely." I can feel the composition of objects within my body at a cellular level. The round is 14 millimeters diameter, cylindrical, silver composite jacket, depleted xenon core. It is currently resting against my deltoid posterior fascia. I took a breath. "I'm a private," I said. "I'm not a medic." I know, but you are here and they are not. A pause, and you have not called your station. I still could. Yes, she said, you could. I didn't call the station. I picked up my field extraction tool. It's a basic piece of kit, designed for removing shrapnel and minor debris from wounds in field conditions. And I said, this is going to hurt, in whatever framework you're working with. Do it, she said. I won't go into every detail of the next 9 minutes because some of it was unpleasant in ways that don't serve the story. What I will say is that she did not make a sound. Not one sound. She sat with her back against the conduit housing and her right hand flat on the deck and her eyes on the corridor, and she made no sound while I worked. I had the round out in 7 minutes. It was exactly as she described, a small, dense cylinder, and even through my polymer gloves I could feel the heat of it, some chemical reaction still active in the compound. I dropped it into a containment pouch from my field kit. The wound started closing immediately. Not gradually, immediately. I watched the tissue knit from the edges inward in a way that made my field medic training from basic training feel entirely inadequate as a reference point. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet, I said. 3 hunters in 6 minutes. 5 minutes now, she was already on her feet. I will handle them. You'll handle 3 Karath hunters with a fresh shoulder wound. Yes. Right, I said. I'm going to call it in. That is the correct procedure, she said. And then, what is your name, soldier? Oseibansu, I said. Emeka Oseibansu. She looked at me for a moment. I am Thessaly Varn Caliph, she said, 3rd heir of the Duskalo clan. You did not ask. Seemed rude to while I had forceps in your shoulder. The corner of her mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something. Call your station, Emeka Oseibansu, she said. I will not be the reason you face disciplinary action. Then she moved off down the corridor in the direction of the hunters, and I called it in. By the time Team 4 reached the northern corridor, 7 minutes, fast for a boarding situation, it was over. I mean that in both senses. It was over in that the 3 Karath hunters were on the deck, alive but thoroughly incapacitated, their weapons secured. And it was over in that the woman responsible for their incapacitation was standing in the middle of the corridor looking, I would say, composed, though her flight suit was in a state that suggested composed, was doing a lot of work. Private Oseibansu was standing 6 meters away, pulse rifle at his shoulder, which was not the correct ready position for a secure and hold scenario, but was, I later decided, emotionally understandable given what he'd apparently just watched. Sergeant Delacroix, who leads Team 4, gave me this in her debrief. Commander, I've done 40-some-odd hostage recovery, boarding intercept, and armed contact operations in 11 years. I've never seen anything like what was in that corridor. The 3 Karath individuals, experienced, well-equipped, I recognized their rig, were on the floor. One was unconscious. One was very confused about where his weapons had gone. The third was pressed against the far wall with a resonance blade to his throat, and he was, I want to be accurate here, terrified. And the woman holding it was just waiting for us. She looked at me when we came through the pressure seal and she said, these individuals should be remanded to Sector 7 detention pending Karath Council review. And then she moved the blade and let him slide down the wall. And she turned to find Oseibansu and she looked at him for a moment. And then she said, thank you. And she meant it. You could tell. I interviewed the 3rd hunter myself during processing, Jaro Vaich, 14-year veteran of Karath operations. He'd done 12 vampire elimination contracts across 6 systems. He wasn't a small man and he wasn't easily frightened. I asked him how 3 experienced hunters with silver composite rounds and full thermal scan equipment had been taken apart in a corridor by a target they'd already wounded. He looked at me for a long time. She slowed down, he said finally. That's the worst part. She didn't run. She turned around and she slowed down and she came back toward us and she was calm. That's the last thing you want to see, when something that fast and that old comes at you calm. He paused. She said one thing to us before she put us down. She said, "A human being took silver out of his flesh for me tonight. You should consider carefully whether I am in a forgiving mood." And then she was just on us. He wouldn't say anything else after that. I expected to get court-martialed. I want to be honest about that. I had failed to immediately report a level 3 security breach. I had made unsanctioned contact with an unregistered non-human visitor. I had performed an unsanctioned field extraction on a non-human patient. I had failed to call for backup before a hostile engagement situation. The list of things I'd done wrong was longer than the list of things I'd done right, even if the things I'd done right included kept a vampire princess alive and helped secure 3 Karath hunters. Commander Prentice Hallbrook sat across from me in the debrief room for about 20 minutes. She's the kind of commanding officer who asks questions very slowly, like she's weighing each one before she releases it. I answered everything honestly because there was no point in doing otherwise. The corridor cameras had caught most of it. When I was done, she sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Osaibansu," she said. "Commander, do you know who Thessaly Varn Calith is?" "Third heir of the Duskalo clan, Commander." She told me herself. "The Duskalo clan," Commander Prentice Hallbrook said, still looking at the ceiling, "controls the trade licensing for 4 of the 7 hyperspace corridors that connect the inner systems to the Rim. They have been a non-aggression partner with the United Earth Council for 61 years. They also have a military capability that," she paused, "the Council finds it prudent not to underestimate." "Yes, Commander. You saved the life of someone who is, in practical terms, equivalent to a head of state." I took a piece of metal out of her shoulder, Commander. "Don't be modest, it doesn't suit you." She looked back down at me. "The Caliph has made a formal request through her personal relay channel. She wants to see you, privately." She paused. "I'm not ordering you to go. I want that on record, but I'm not ordering you not to go either." I thought about it for about 2 seconds. "When," I said. They'd given her a visitor's suite in the diplomatic wing. Draveth 9 has a small one, 3 rooms, reserved for the kinds of people you don't put in standard quarters. It was nicer than anything else on the station by a considerable margin, which still put it at functional rather than comfortable. But the lighting was softer, and they'd adjusted the temperature and turned off the overhead environmental hum, which is the station equivalent of rolling out the good carpet. She was standing at the transparasteel viewport when I came in, looking at Draveth the same way I had earlier, watching the cloud bands. She'd changed out of the damaged flight suit. She was wearing something dark and fitted that looked like it cost more than my annual salary, and her shoulder, I noticed, showed no sign of any wound at all. "Private Osaibansu," she said without turning. "Sit down, please." There was one chair. I sat. She turned from the viewport and studied me for a moment. Up close, in softer light, she was, I don't know. There are people you look at and understand immediately that the scale they're operating on is different from yours. Not superior, not inferior, just different. Like looking at something geological. A mountain doesn't make you feel small because it's hostile. It makes you feel small because it simply exists at a different order of magnitude. That was Thessaly Varn Calith. "You should know," she said, "that I have not survived for 412 years by being careless with gratitude. I do not offer it readily. I do not offer it performatively. When I say I am grateful, I mean it in the full weight of what that word carries for someone of my kind." She paused. "I am grateful, Emeka Osaibansu." The way she said my full name, both names together, no shortening, with the exact correct pronunciation of Osai, did something to the room, made it more formal, like the air got heavier. "I was just doing what seemed right," I said. "Yes," she said, That is precisely why it carries weight. You had no incentive. You had considerable disincentive. You chose nonetheless. She tilted her head slightly. I have lived through a great many centuries of people choosing based on incentive. It gets tedious. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. She moved across the room and sat down across from me. There was no second chair, so she sat on the edge of the small table, which somehow did not seem casual. It seemed deliberate, a choice to be at eye level. The Duskalo clan wishes to reward you, she said. This is not optional. A life debt, particularly the life of a clan heir, is not something my people treat as a social courtesy. It is a formal obligation. The reward will be offered. It is already decided. Okay, I said carefully. The clan council met by relay 17 minutes after I confirmed I was alive. They have voted. She paused. They have offered you 3 things. Wealth sufficient for what your kind would term generational security, safe passage and protected status through all Duskalo trade corridors for the remainder of your natural life, an official designation as a clan friend, which carries diplomatic implications that your United Earth Council would very much value. I sat with that for a moment. Those are, I said, remarkable things. Yes. But you said reward, not rewards. Plural, you listed 3. Yes. Which one are they offering? She looked at me steadily. All 3, but there is a condition attached. And here is where I should tell you that her voice changed. Not dramatically, subtly. The way the light changes just before a major pressure system moves in. You wouldn't notice if you weren't paying attention, but something in the air shifts and your body registers it before your mind does. The condition, she said, is that you accompany me to Duskalo. I waited. There was clearly more. As my acknowledged debt bound, she continued. In our tradition, when a life debt is created through personal action, not institutional, not coincidental, but chosen, the one who acted enters a formal relationship with the clan. A debt bound is neither servant nor prisoner. You would have full rights, full voice, and all the protections of clan citizenship. She paused again. But you would be bound to Duskalo for a period of no less than 5 of your years. And during that time, you would be subject to one additional requirement. Which is, you would serve as my personal guard. Silence. I have, she said, just been targeted by 3 Karath hunters on a station where nobody was supposed to know my route, which means my route was compromised, which means there is someone within my clan's information structure who told the Karath where I would be. I am returning to Duskalo to find out who, and until I do, I cannot trust any of my own people completely. She let that land. I need someone at my back who has no investment in Duskalo politics, she said, who has no faction loyalty, who has already demonstrated tonight that they make decisions based on what is right rather than what is advantageous. You need someone whose motivations you can actually predict, I said. Yes. Because humans are simpler, I said, not bitterly, just noting it. Because humans are honest, she corrected, which is not the same as simple. Most of my people have been navigating 4-dimensional political landscapes for centuries. Their honesty is stratified. Yours is not. I looked at her for a long time. That's the terrifying condition, I said. That's what they're calling it. I imagine your colleagues will call it that, yes. What would you call it? She considered the question. I would call it an honest request from someone who has few people to make honest requests to. Witness account. Commander ASHA PRNTSSHOLBROK. Operations Director Draveth 9 filed. Cycle 4, Month 7, Year 2387. He came back to my office at 300 hours. I was still there. It had been that kind of night. He sat down across from my desk, and he had that look that young soldiers get when they've just made a decision they understand is going to change everything. She wants me to go to Duskalo, he said. I know, I said. The formal request came through channels 20 minutes ago. He looked at me. You're not surprised. I'm a little surprised, I said, but only a little. The Caliph bloodline does not accumulate debts it doesn't intend to pay, and they don't pay them cheaply. I set down my cup. Emeka, I have to tell you something as your commanding officer, and then I have to tell you something as a human being who's been doing this for a long time. Okay. As your commanding officer, I cannot order you to go. This is outside my operational authority. The United Earth Council will have opinions, and those opinions will require significant bureaucratic navigation, and none of that is your problem tonight. If you choose to go, I will write your transfer as a diplomatic secondment. The Council has a standing protocol for exactly this kind of arrangement. It covers you. And as a human being, I thought about the Duskalo clan. I thought about what 400 years of political survival looked like from the inside. I thought about what it would mean to be a young man from Accra, Earth, dropped into the middle of a vampire clan's internal power struggle. As a human being, I said, I would tell you that you've already shown her who you are. That's not nothing. People, any species, they build on what's already been shown. What you showed her tonight is already the foundation. The question is what you want to build on it. He was quiet for a moment. She said she needs someone whose motivations are predictable, he said. Is that an insult? No, I said. That's someone who's been lied to by complicated people for a very long time, saying that straightforward is the rarest thing they've found. He nodded slowly. I'm going to go, he said. I know, I said. He started to get up and then he stopped. Commander, how much trouble am I in, with the breach and the unsanctioned contact and... Emeka, I said, you saved the life of the third heir of Duskalo on my station. I'm not going to spend 5 minutes on paperwork about protocol. Get out of my office. The Duskalo clan's primary home station, Varnkeep, they call it, is not what I expected. I think I'd built up in the hours of travel from Draveth 9 some image of a Gothic fortress, dramatic spires, purple lighting, whatever the galactic equivalent of stone and shadow looks like. My reference points for vampires were cultural, human cultural, which is to say, the accumulated mythology of a species that has had a complicated relationship with the Duskalo and their allied clans for about 300 years, ever since first contact. Varnkeep is not a Gothic fortress. It's a station the size of a small moon, an actual megastation, the kind that takes 15 minutes to transit from one end to the other by internal rail. It was built in stages over centuries, and you can see the evidence of that in the architecture sections that are old and organic, grown almost, dark stone and vaulting curves, and sections that are modern and precise, the clean geometry of current xenoarchitecture. It hangs in the space above a binary system, 2 stars orbiting each other at a distance that, from certain viewing ports in Varnkeep, creates a perpetual red-orange twilight effect that I was told, privately, is not coincidental. The Duskalo built their home to always be at dusk. I thought that was actually beautiful when I understood it, not theatrical, meaningful. A people who defined themselves by the threshold moment between dark and light had built a home that lived permanently on that threshold. We arrived on a private shuttle. Thessaly had her own crew, 6 of them, all Duskalo, all obviously veteran, all of whom regarded me with a varying spectrum of expressions, ranging from cautious neutrality to the kind of careful blankness that usually means someone is working hard to conceal their actual reaction. The one who had the most trouble concealing it was a tall, severely angular man named Veth Caliph, no immediate relation to Thessaly, I was told. The name was a clan-wide designation, who served as her primary aide. He looked at me the way you look at something you found in your food. A human, he said to Thessaly, in a tone that was technically not disrespectful and practically extremely disrespectful. Yes, she said, walking past him. His name is Emeka Osaibansu. He is my debt-bound and will be accorded full clan friend status effective immediately. If anyone has difficulty with this, they should bring it to me directly, and I will explain my position at length. She said the last sentence in a tone that made "explain my position at length" sound like something nobody would enjoy. Veth said nothing further. She had given me a briefing during the travel, an extensive, efficient one that she delivered the way she did everything, precisely and without wasted words. I knew the basic structure of Duskalo clan politics. The heirs' council, 7 members, each from a different branch of the bloodline. The current first heir, Thessaly's eldest sister, Mara, who was away on a diplomatic mission. The second heir, Corvin, who was on Varnkeep and who Thessaly had described as ambitious in the way that functions best in a world without competition, which was her way of saying he was dangerous when he thought he could get away with it. The third heir was Thessaly, and there were 4 others below her. The Kareth hunters had known her route. The route had been logged in the heirs' council relay system, which only the 7 heirs and the station's senior security coordinator could access. Someone in that circle had sold her out. She didn't know who. That was the problem, and it was the reason she needed someone at her back who couldn't be bought. Account VETHKALITH, primary aid to the third heir. Duskalo clan internal record filed. Cycle 4, month 7, year 2387. I want this on record because I was wrong, and I am not a person who enjoys being wrong without at least documenting it accurately. When the third heir returned from Draveth 9 with a human in tow and told me he was her debt-bound and personal guard, I was not supportive. I want to be honest about that. I've been with Thessaly Kalith for 41 years. I know her better than almost anyone, and I had never in 41 years seen her extend a trust that large, that fast, to any person of any species. My primary concern was that she was compromised, that the silver compound wound and the stress of the Kareth encounter had affected her judgment, that she had made a decision under duress that she would look at differently once she'd had time to recover. I told her this, diplomatically, because that is how you tell Thessaly things, but directly, because she respects directness. She listened to everything I said, then she was quiet for a moment. Veth, she said, who knew my route. The heirs' council relay and coordinator Ash. Who could have sold that route? A pause. Any of them, I said carefully. Yes, any of them, myself included, from an outside perspective. So I need someone I am certain didn't sell my route. And the only person I am certain didn't sell my route is the man who pulled the round out of my shoulder when he had absolutely no reason to do so, and every reason not to. She looked at me very steadily. His incentive structure is completely transparent. He wanted to help someone who was hurt. That's it. That's all of it. When was the last time you could say that about anyone in this station? I didn't answer that question. The answer was uncomfortable. The human Emeka, I watched him in those first days, closely. It was my job to be skeptical of him, and I took the job seriously. Here is what I observed. He was not pretending to be something he was not. That was the first thing. He was clearly aware of being out of his depth. A 26-year-old soldier from Earth dropped into the middle of a vampire clan megastation, surrounded by people who'd been alive for hundreds of years and who regarded him with everything from curiosity to contempt. He knew that. He didn't pretend otherwise. He didn't try to perform competence he didn't have. What he did have, and what I underestimated completely, was situational instinct. He'd learned 3 patrol corridors and their pressure seal sequences by the end of the first day. By the end of the second day, he'd identified the security camera blind spots without being told. By the end of the third day, he came to me with a specific question about the heirs' council relay protocol that told me he'd been thinking about the route compromise more carefully than I'd given him credit for. I answered the question, Then I sat with it for a while. He was trying to do his job, not for money, though the reward was real and significant, not for status, he had none here that mattered. He was doing it because he'd agreed to do it, and he took that seriously. I was not wrong to be skeptical, but I was wrong in my conclusions. The hard part wasn't the culture shock, though there was plenty of that. The hard part wasn't even the political environment, though that was dense and treacherous in ways that took me time to map. The hard part was the nights, initially. Not in a frightening way, I want to be clear about that. Varnkeep's internal schedule runs on a 40-hour cycle, and the segment they call night is a genuine dimming of the station's environmental lighting, an 8-hour period of reduced activity and temperature. It looks different from a night on Earth, or from whatever passes for night on a military station. The Duskalo light their living spaces with something bioluminescent, panels set into the walls that glow very faintly in blues and deep greens, the kind of light that your eyes adjust to, and then find adequate without quite knowing when the adjustment happened. I'd lie in my quarters. I'd been given a room in the Air's personal residential wing, which was its own statement, and I'd listen to the station around me, and I'd think about how far I was from Accra, from my grandmother's house, from anything that smelled or sounded or felt like where I'd started. But here's the thing about being far from home. After a while, the new place starts to have its own textures. The bioluminescent light started to feel calming instead of strange. The 40-hour cycle stopped fighting my body clock and started to feel natural. The sounds of Varnkeep, which were different from Dravith 9 industrial hum, quieter and more organic, almost like a very slow breathing, started to feel familiar. And Thessaly she was a consistent presence. Not warm exactly. The word warm doesn't quite fit her, but consistent. She showed up when she said she would show up. She told me what she told me she would tell me. She didn't play games with information. She was direct about what I needed to know to do my job and measured about what I didn't need to know yet. And she was honest about which category she was drawing from when she answered my questions. For someone trying to find a leak in their own clan, she was remarkably forthcoming with me. "You're telling me things that could get you in trouble if I was the wrong person," I said to her once, about 2 weeks in. "You're not the wrong person," she said. "You don't know that for certain." "I know it more certainly than I know it about anyone else here," she said. "The math is simple, Emeka. Everyone else on Varnkeep has a history here, faction loyalties, family connections, old debts and older grievances. You have none of those things. The only relationship you have to any person or entity in Duskalo is the one you've built in the past 2 weeks, and I've been paying attention to how you build it." "How do I build it?" She considered, carefully, honestly. With a great deal of observation before action, she paused. "You remind me of my mother." I didn't know how to respond to that. I waited. "She was the first heir before Mara," she said. "She died 112 years ago, which is not a long time for our kind." Another pause. She had a gift for patience, for watching things all the way to the end before she decided what they meant. Most of us decide too early. We see a pattern and we commit to the pattern and we stop seeing the information that doesn't fit. She stopped. "You think the person who sold your route is someone obvious," I said. "Everyone assumes it's Corvin, including me until recently. But Corvin benefits from my death, the obvious suspect with the obvious motive. And the Kareth aren't subtle, but their clients usually are." She looked at me. "What do you think?" "I think," I said slowly, "that the person who sold your route might be someone who knew that Corvin would be the obvious suspect, someone who wanted you dead and wanted Corvin blamed for it." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "that is what I think." 3 weeks in, someone tried to kill her again. I want to walk through it carefully because the details matter, and because I've told this part badly in the past, rushed through it or made it sound more dramatic than it was, and both of those distortions miss the truth. It was the 40th hour of cycle 19, the last hour of their night, the dim period. I was outside Thessaly's quarters, which is where I slept, on a narrow bench in the antechamber. It wasn't comfortable. I'd stopped noticing. The sound that woke me was not dramatic. It was a very faint mechanical tick, the specific sound of a pressure lock disengaging. Not Thessaly's door, a service access panel in the ceiling of the antechamber. The kind of panel that opens for maintenance bots and that nobody else is supposed to be using. I was on my feet before I was fully awake. Soldier's reflex, built into the body by basic training and 2 years of perimeter guard. The panel opened, not a maintenance bot. A figure dropped from the ceiling access, and I was already moving, and the collision was not elegant in any way. We hit the floor together, and whatever weapon they were carrying, a small needler, I found out later, went spinning across the deck. We struggled. I want to be honest. Whoever it was, they were strong. Not as strong as a Duskalo, but considerably stronger than a human should be, which told me something was augmented somewhere in their biology. My field training in hand-to-hand is adequate but not exceptional, and I spent about 15 seconds losing. Then Thessaly came through her door. The figure released me and tried to run. They made it approximately 4 meters. I don't know exactly what she did to stop them. I was on the floor catching my breath, and my viewing angle was poor. What I know is that there was a sound I felt more than heard, and then the figure was on the floor and Thessaly was crouching over them, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were different, brighter, less gold, more white, like a lamp turned up too high. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No," I said. "Bruised. Who is that?" She looked down at the figure. They were conscious but not going anywhere. "Fetch Veth," she said. "Tell him to bring the air seal and tell him quietly." The figure in the antechamber was a clan member from the outer residential section, a junior administrative aide with a 14-year tenure. His name was Dairn. He was not the traitor. He was, as it turned out, the hired instrument of the traitor. But he was more useful than the traitor in one respect. He was willing to talk. I am not going to document the specifics of how we persuaded him to talk. What I will say is that Thessaly is 4 centuries old and has seen the full range of what persuasion looks like, and she selected an option on the less brutal end of that range because she was working with a time constraint, and she needed accurate information, not broken testimony. He talked within an hour. The name he gave us was not Corvin. It was the Air's security coordinator, a woman named Ash Varath, who had been in that position for 30 years, who had full access to the Air's council relay, who had, 8 months ago, received a settlement from a Karath-affiliated financial shell entity in an amount that, when we pulled the records, was just large enough to not be completely obvious against her normal compensation. 30 years of service. 30 years of being trusted with the most sensitive information in the clan's security structure. She'd sold it for money, not ideology, not grievance money. Thessaly sat with that information for a long time. I've known her for 41 years. I've watched her navigate betrayal before. The Duskalo political environment is not a gentle one. But there's a difference between discovering that someone is working against you in the slow, political way, maneuvering for position, building alliances, nudging factions, and discovering that someone simply sold you to people with silver bullets for a large payment. One is chess, the other is it's just ugly. "She'll be in the relay room," Thessaly said finally. "She runs the overnight system check at this hour." "Yes," I said. "Let's go." Emeka was on his feet before either of us moved, which I noted. I noted it because he was not asked. He simply stood up, picked up the needler he'd removed from Dairn's possession, checked its charge, and positioned himself behind and to the left of Thessaly. He had figured out in 3 weeks which position maximized his coverage of both exits in any given corridor configuration, without being taught, without being asked. I had been wrong about him. I had been significantly wrong about him. I told him so later. He said, "I'm not trying to prove anything, I'm just doing my job." Which was, I thought, exactly the right answer. Ash Varath was in the relay room. Thessaly walked in first. I was behind her and to the left. I'm not going to give you a dramatic description of the confrontation because it wasn't dramatic. Thessaly was simply final. The way a stone is final. She walked into that relay room and she laid out what she knew, precisely, accurately, without embellishment, and she asked Ash Varath one question. "Why?" Ash Varath looked at the floor. "My son," she said, "he owed a debt to a Rim faction, the kind of debt that doesn't get paid any other way." A long silence. "You could have come to me," Thessaly said. "I didn't think." "You didn't think I would help." Ash Varath didn't answer. "You have been coordinating my security for 30 years, Thessaly said, very quietly. "You knew me well enough to know every route I would take. You did not know me well enough to believe I would help your son." Another silence. "That's the failure," Thessaly said. "That's the part that I'll carry." A pause. "Not the betrayal, the fact that I was here for 30 years and you didn't believe I was safe to ask." I watched Ash Varath's face break, not dramatically. Just the tension went out of it, all at once, like a held breath released. It was the most human thing I'd seen on Varnkeep. I want to say that clearly because people sometimes assume I left early, that the condition was eventually waived or the situation resolved and I went back to Earth. I didn't. I completed the full term of the debt-bound agreement, and in the final months when the formal obligation was nearly over, Thessaly asked me, not asked me as a matter of contract or clan obligation, but asked me, one person to another, whether I would consider staying longer. I didn't answer right away. Those 5 years had been, I don't have clean words for it. The diplomatic training alone would have made my grandmother proud, who'd always wanted me to be something that involved a suit and a title. I'd learned Duskalo clan protocol, 3 dialects of the primary vampire language family, the basics of xenodiplomacy, and more about the Rim political situation than I'd ever expected to know. I'd helped Thessaly navigate the aftermath of the Varath situation, the fallout within the Heirs Council, the negotiations with the Karath faction over the status of the 3 hunters who'd been captured on Draveth 9, the internal restructuring of Duskalo security that Ash Varath's betrayal had made necessary. I'd done all of that as the only human in a vampire megastation. And I'll be honest with you, it hadn't been comfortable. There had been periods of profound isolation. There had been Duskalo clan members who never stopped looking at me the way Veth had initially looked at me, who never adjusted to the presence of a human in the residential wing of the heirs' quarters. There had been moments of cultural collision so complete and so disorienting that I'd sat alone in the bioluminescent dim of my quarters and just breathed and waited for the feeling to pass. But there had also been Varnkeep itself, which I'd come to love in a way I hadn't expected. The perpetual dusk, the slow-breathing sound of the station. The clan archives, which I'd spent hundreds of hours in, reading the documented history of the Duskalo across 4 centuries, a history that was complicated and violent and surprising, and in ways that took me time to understand, genuinely moving. There had been Veth, who had become something I'd describe as a friend, though that word doesn't quite map across species. Something more like a trusted colleague with genuine mutual respect, which might actually be more meaningful. And there had been Thessaly. I'm going to be careful about how I describe this because I think it's important to be accurate. What existed between Thessaly Varn Calith and me was not a human-scale relationship. She was 4 centuries old. I was 31. She was the 3rd heir of a vampire clan with diplomatic reach across 7 hyperspace corridors. I was a former private from Accra who'd stumbled into her life through a maintenance panel. But she had trusted me, completely, with her life, literally, but more than that. She'd trusted me with the truth of what was happening inside her clan, the fear underneath the composure, the loneliness that comes with being someone that powerful in an environment where everyone is always calculating. She talked to me the way she'd said her mother had looked at things, all the way to the end before deciding what they meant. I think I'd done the same with her. I think I'd looked at something completely outside my experience and waited until I understood it before I decided what it was. "What made you stay?" someone asked me years later, a journalist, young, earnest, doing a piece on human-vampire diplomatic relations for one of the council publications. I thought about it. "She asked me," I said, and I'd learned enough by then to know that she didn't ask things lightly. "Was it the rewards?" the journalist said, "the clan friend status, the wealth?" "No," I said, "it wasn't that. If you'd asked me on day 3 whether I was staying for the money, the answer would have been no. If you ask me now, the answer is still no." "Then what?" I thought about the bioluminescent dim, about the perpetual dusk above the binary system, about Thessaly standing at a viewport watching stars she'd been watching for centuries. "She said to me once," I said, "that most people decide what something means before they've seen all of it. They see a pattern and they commit to the pattern." She said I reminded her of someone who didn't do that. I paused. I stayed because I wanted to see all of it. I wasn't done watching. I will not tell this story with the kind of distance that makes historical documents comfortable. The Historical Preservation Society has asked for my account because Emeka Osibonsu is now the subject of what the human media calls a landmark moment in cross-species diplomatic history, and they want the primary perspective. Fine, here it is. He came through a maintenance panel covered in my blood and said, with perfect calm, "I'm going to need to know exactly how deep it is." That is how it started, not with a speech, not with a calculation, with a question that had only one purpose, to do the thing that needed doing. I have been alive for 417 years. I have met, by any reasonable count, several thousand individuals of various species. I have been betrayed by some, supported by others, used by more than I could count. I have built alliances and dissolved them. I have trusted and been proven right and trusted and been proved catastrophically wrong. I did not trust Emeka Osibonsu immediately. I evaluated him. There is a difference and it matters. I watched him for those first hours, on the station, in the corridor, in the moments after the hunters were down, and I applied every faculty I have to reading him accurately. What I found was a person who was exactly what he appeared to be. No more, no less. Not simple, he was not simple, but uncomplicated in a way that is genuinely rare. His motivations were layered and human and comprehensible, which is not the same as transparent, but they were not concealed. He wasn't hiding anything. He wasn't playing anything. He was there, he saw someone in trouble, he helped. The condition I offered him, accompanying me to Duskalo, serving as debt-bound, was not, despite what the documentary record calls it, a terrifying one. It was an honest one. I needed someone I could trust. He was the only candidate. I told him so directly and let him make the choice. He chose, and he served. And he was consistently, and over the full 5 years, and without any deviation that I found, exactly what he had demonstrated himself to be in that corridor. Do you know what is rare? Not honesty. Honesty is common enough. People are honest when it costs them nothing. What is rare is honesty that is structural. Honesty that doesn't flex under pressure. Honesty that is simply what a person is, regardless of circumstance. After the Varath situation was resolved, Corvin came to me. He was not pleased about being the obvious suspect. He'd spent 2 months with that particular attention on him, which was uncomfortable even by his standards. He came to me in the semi-formal airway, which means he came with 2 attendants and used the full address form, which signals seriousness. He said, You staked the security of this clan on a human you met 3 hours before you brought him here. Yes, I said. And your reasoning? He had no reason to help me. He helped me anyway. That tells me his reasons are not transactional. Corvin looked at me for a while. And if you're wrong? Then I'm wrong, I said. But if I'm wrong about a person who pulled silver out of my shoulder at risk to himself with no incentive, then my judgment is so fundamentally broken that no other decision I make matters anyway. I'd rather bet on the thing I saw than on any analysis of a situation I can't fully observe. He didn't argue. Corvin is many things, but he's not stupid. Emeka stayed for 7 years in the end, 2 years beyond the formal debt-bound period. He asked to extend, which was, I want to be clear that surprised me, not because I'd misjudged him, because the generosity of it surprised me. He'd fulfilled the obligation. He'd been given everything the clan had promised. He could have left with honor and full standing. He stayed because he said, I'm not done yet. When he finally left, returned to Earth, eventually, though he's been back to Varnkeep 4 times since, the Heirs Council voted to grant him something that has been granted to 3 other individuals in Duscalow's 4th century recorded history, a permanent seat of witness at the Heirs Council, not a voting seat. An observer's seat, the clan's formal acknowledgement that his perspective is valued enough to be present in our most sensitive deliberations. He accepted it with that particular quality of his, quiet, considered, no performance. He said thank you, which in Duscalow formal address is not a simple thing, and he meant it in the full weight of what the word carries. My mother would have liked him. She had a gift for patience, for watching things all the way to the end, for finding the thing that was exactly what it appeared to be and knowing how rare that was. He is exactly what he appeared to be. In a corridor on Draveth 9, covered in my blood with 3 hunters 6 minutes away, he was someone who asked one question: how deep is it? Not what do I get, not who is she? Not is this my problem? How deep is it, because there's work to do. 417 years, and I can count on one hand the people I've known who operated that way. He is one of them. I am grateful. The incident on Draveth 9 has been analyzed extensively in the years since it occurred. Diplomatic scholars cite it as the foundational event for the current United Earth Council Duscalow Accords, which have governed peaceful trade and movement across 4 hyperspace corridors for the past 9 years. Military historians point to the formal debt-bound protocol as a model for cross-species conflict resolution mechanism. Legal theorists debate the implications of the clan friend designation under the current Galactic Compact. All of that is true and relevant and worth studying. But I've spent 20 years in xenoanthropology, which means I've spent 20 years trying to understand how different species make sense of each other across the vast and mostly unbridged distances of history and culture and biology that separate them. I've read 10,000 primary documents about first contacts gone right and first contacts gone catastrophically wrong. The thing that I come back to, every time I read the Draveth 9 record, is this. He heard a sound, he turned. He saw someone hurt, he asked how deep. No framework, no protocol, no calculation about political implications or species relations or personal risk. Just, someone is hurt, how deep, let me help. The entire subsequent history, the Accords, the clan friend designation, the 9 years of peaceful hyperspace transit, the observer's seat, all of it grew from that one moment. A young man in a corridor on a border station, doing the thing that seemed right. There's a theory in xenoanthropology not universally accepted that the core of interspecies trust is not shared values. It's not shared language. It's not even shared biology, though that helps. The core of it, the argument goes, is recognizing something in the other that you recognize in yourself. Something that doesn't need translation. Something that says, here is a person who does the thing that seems right.